Welcome to the deep dive. You sent us your sources, and we're here to really extract the signal from the noise.
Exactly.
Think of this as your shortcut to understanding what really matters, packed with surprising insights and hopefully, a bit of engaging conversation.
Today, we're digging into a really fascinating set of materials you provided. They detail these congressional hearings of the DOGE Committee, that's DOGE, defending our government's ethics.
Right. The DOGE Committee.
And these hearings, they were initiated by Representative Marjorie Taylor Green. They really offer a compelling case study in, well, political maneuvering and the dynamics of public discourse today.
So our mission here is to dissect these events, understand the motivations.
Yes, precisely, the motivations driving them, and ultimately try to grasp their broader significance, what it all means.
Okay, so we're focusing on the rise and, well, the sources seem to suggest maybe the unraveling of this DOGE committee.
That's the narrative arc in these materials, yes.
And the key players are Representative Marjorie Taylor Green, she's the chair, and then the Democratic response, mostly from Representatives Jasmine Crockett and Casar.
Those are the central figures in this account.
Okay, let's dive in. How did this committee even start? It seemed kind of sudden.
It really did. The emergence of the DOGE Committee was quite abrupt. Almost overnight, it felt like. You had this polished logo appearing
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
alongside Representative Green's announcement. It proclaimed this dedication to defending our government's ethics. And it came with a pretty assertive rollout in right-leaning media circles.
Assertive is definitely one way to put it. Her stated mission, I mean, it was bold, exposing the woke left's corruption, right? Targeting things she called fake genders, fake
Just
news.
all of that. It was a very strong declaration from the outset.
And the sources you looked at suggest maybe a dual purpose, not just ethics oversight.
Well, yes. While the stated aim was ethics, the materials you shared strongly hint that for Representative Green, it was also about, bolstering her own profile, firing up her base, and maybe, potentially, laying groundwork for future political ambitions. A Senate run, perhaps. The committee gave her a very visible platform.
And that platform worked, initially at least. Right-wing media jumped on it.
Oh, absolutely. They amplified her message significantly, portraying her as this key figure in the fight against so-called wokeness. Her announcements went viral incredibly quickly.
Quite remarkable speed.
It was. And the committee didn't waste time. It quickly moved to issue subpoenas targeting individuals, groups, mostly those aligned with the ideologies Representative Green was focused on.
So the goal was clearly to create some fireworks during the hearings, get those shareable clips.
That certainly seems to be the strategy suggested by the sources, yes. Generate impactful moments.
But while all this was happening very publicly, the Democrats, they played it differently.
A much quieter approach. They strategically assigned representatives, Jasmine Crockett, Casar, and also Robert Garcia to the committee. No big, fiery press conference, just a measured placement.
Why them specifically, did the sources say?
The implication is that Democratic leadership saw an opportunity. They likely recognized that this committee, even though it seemed designed for one viewpoint, could actually be used as a stage to challenge Green's narrative, to address broader issues. They understood the power of that televised.
It was surprisingly calm, considering the buildup.
It really was. Almost unexpectedly restrained. Representative Green maintained a composed demeanor. Her opening remarks focused on government integrity, the need for it.
A bit of a facade, maybe?
The sources suggest it might have been a calculated move, perhaps. Establish an air of legitimacy before launching to the more specific agenda items.
And meanwhile, Crockett and Casar were, just watching.
Taking notes. Very much in observation mode, it seems. The materials describe them meticulously taking notes, analyzing witness responses, and really identifying patterns in Green's questioning.
Patterns like?
Things like the repeated references to children, morality, this particular vision of the American way. It was like they were mapping her playbook in real time.
Dissecting her rhetoric.
Exactly. Representative Crockett even highlighted one sentence Green used. "We are the last defense against degeneracy in public life." That phrase. Well, it becomes quite telling later on.
Okay, so fast forward to the second hearing. The mood shifts.
Definitely. The sources describe a palpable tension, a sense that the initial civility was maybe just temporary.
And this is where Crockett steps up.
This is her moment to really take the floor. She began with this calm but very sharp opening, immediately juxtaposing the committee's focus. Trans athletes was a big one,
Right.
with other critical issues facing women. Things like funding cuts to domestic violence shelters, the fight for equal pay, civil rights protections.
And she has numbers, data.
Yes, backed it up with concrete data. Direct questions about budget cuts, how they were affecting women and girls specifically.
Yeah.
It wasn't abstract. It was about tangible consequences.
Rounding it in reality.
Precisely. And then she pivoted. She talked about what she argued were the real concerns of the young women she represents.
Like?
Gun violence, economic insecurity, assault. It was a powerful reframing, shifting the focus away from the committee's stated anxieties to these much more widespread challenges.
And then came the Trump or trans thing that got a lot of attention.
It did. She basically laid out policy after policy from the Trump administration, cuts to medical research, healthcare access issues, transgender military ban,
Family separation.
family separations, trade wars, cuts to civil rights enforcement, inflammatory rhetoric, threats to Social Security, contraception access, endorsements of candidates accused of abuse, a long list.
Wow.
And then she contrasts that whole catalog with the committee's focus on, say, trans athletes.
Yeah.
It created this incredibly stark comparison.
What was the effect in the room?
The sources describe a stunned silence, a real shift in the atmosphere. And Representative Greene, who'd been so assertive before, suddenly looked visibly uncomfortable. Her confidence seemed to falter.
And Crockett didn't let up.
No, she delivered that really pointed question. When did we stop protecting the people most at risk and start blaming those with the least power? A direct challenge to the committee's whole premise.
And someone stepped in, a Democrat.
Yes, the Democratic ranking member quickly intervened, basically preventing Greene from responding immediately. It seemed very strategic.
Let the question hang in the air.
Exactly. Let it resonate. And the reaction outside the room was almost immediate. That clip went viral very quickly.
Presumably framed differently depending on the news outlet.
Oh, for sure. Fox News presented it one way, MSNBC another. But the sources suggest a broader sentiment of support for Crockett started to build. You could really feel the power dynamic shifting in that room.
So, hearing number 3, did the tension continue?
Oh, yes. It amplified. The sources describe Greene coming out swinging, immediately attacking radical gender ideology. But her control seemed brittle.
How so?
Well, there was a moment when a witness just factually mentioned budget cuts that happened under the Trump administration, standard information,
Okay.
and Greene tried to shut him down, just cut off that line of testimony, tried to control the information allowed.
And that's when Crockett stepped in again.
Yes, she made a point of order, invoking House rules, defending the witness's right to give a full answer. It seems like a small thing, procedural,
That's significant.
very significant, because the Republican side was silent. Nobody backed Greene up in that moment. It really highlighted this potential erosion of her authority.
And then Crockett said something directly to Greene.
She did. A very direct line. You can swing that gavel all you want, but it won't erase the facts, and it certainly won't silence me.
Oof. How did Greene react?
The sources note a tremor in her voice, a flash of frustration. She accused Crockett of turning her committee into a woke apology.
Her committee.
Right. And Crockett's calm rebuttal was, "It's not your committee, it's the people's committee." Then she accused Greene of being afraid of being challenged by the truth.
And Greene dropped the gavel after that.
Drop the gavel. That exchange, that visual, it became another huge clip, looped constantly on news networks.
Again, with different spins, I imagine.
Absolutely. Different spins, memes, competing hashtags on social media. It was clear the narrative was really slipping away from Greene's control.
And Caesar had that line, theater with consequences.
Yeah, Representative Caesar's quiet observation. It really captured the weight of these public performances. And they weren't just political points. They had real impact.
Okay, then there was a hearing on anti-Semitism. That sounds like it should be less controversial.
On the surface, yes. Seemingly bipartisan topic. But the sources suggest Representative Caesar saw it differently, maybe as a deflection tactic by the majority.
So he challenged them on it.
Directly. She started asking the Republican members very pointed, yes or no questions. Would they condemn specific anti-Semitic statements or actions by prominent figures? He named names Trump, RFK Jr.
Referencing things like Charlottesville.
Exactly. Charlottesville's very fine people, a COVID-19 conspiracy theory linked to RFK Jr. Trump pardoning a January 6th rioter who'd praised Hitler. Specific documented instances.
And the response?
Silence. According to the sources, just silence from the Republican members on those direct questions. The chairman tried to redirect, move things along.
But Caesar wouldn't let it go.
He wouldn't. He made that statement for the record. Let the record show that not a single Republican on this committee was willing to publicly denounce the most visible examples of anti-Semitism in our political discourse. Powerful stuff.
A clear indictment.
And then he shifted. He started talking about his own experiences, rising anti-Semitism in his district in Austin. Specific examples: vandalism, fear within the Jewish community there.
Making it personal, not just political.
Exactly. Bringing that human dimension back in. He criticized using anti-Semitism as a shield to silence critics of powerful people. And his line, "This isn't oversight, it's theater." And the cost of that performance isn't just political, it's personal. Really hit home.
And Greene's reaction during this?
Silence. She didn't engage during that part. Casar later reflected, according to the sources, on the importance of actually listening in these settings, a clear contrast in approach.
So after these hearings, things were getting pretty tense. What was happening behind the scenes?
The sources paint a picture of Representative Greene becoming privately frustrated, recognizing she was losing control of the narrative she intended to set.
While Crockett and Casar?
There's a moment described, a quiet conversation between them, sort of acknowledging the shift, reaffirming their goal to represent those often made invisible in these kinds of proceedings.
And then the leak happened to the Capitol Ledger.
Yes, that story broke. Allegations about stock purchases Greene made just before a significant Trump tariff announcement. The timing certainly raised eyebrows.
Potential insider trading concerns.
That was the implication hanging in the air. And Representative Crockett, very subtly, raised it during a different hearing, one on social media censorship.
How?
Through a procedural question. Didn't name Greene directly, but posed a question that clearly alluded to the potential for conflicts of interest, for insider trading based on non-public information.
Planting a seed of doubt.
Exactly. The sources describe a palpable doubt settling into the room. And you started seeing subtle shifts, even within Greene's own party.
Like what?
Awkward silences when she spoke sometimes, fewer colleagues jumping to her public defense, some representatives quietly, distancing themselves.
And Crockett got that anonymous text.
Yeah, keep going, we're watching. It suggests some internal unease, maybe even support for the pushback against Greene from unexpected quarters.
So Greene feels the pressure and calls an emergency hearing.
A hastily announced emergency hearing on moral corruption in public education. The language was vague, the timing felt, desperate. An attempt to pivot back to safer ground, perhaps.
Back to the culture war themes.
Right. Familiar rhetoric about threats to traditional values, explicit materials in schools. The playbook she seemed comfortable with.
But Crockett and Casar were ready.
They appeared prepared, observant, waiting for their turn.
And then Crockett delivered that closing speech.
A very powerful moment, according to all the sources. She started by drawing this stark contrast again. The committee's focus on, I think the number was 10 trans athletes.
Okay.
Versus the 66,000 kids in underfunded schools facing real hardships.
Mm-hmm.
Just the scale of that comparison was incredibly effective at reframing the committee's priorities.
She made it personal too, right?
Very personal. She spoke as a Black woman, expressing this deep weariness with what she called performative hearings, hearings designed to distract from real problems.
And she gave examples.
Really poignant ones. Mothers grieving children lost to violence, students assaulted and then blamed by the system, grandmothers raising grandchildren because of the opioid crisis, grounding it in lived experience.
Connecting it back to the people they represent.
Yes. And then came that direct statement. I'm tired of pretending that these hearings are about morality when they're about distraction. I'm tired of hearing the word protect when what they mean is erase.
Wow.
My job is not to persecute, it is to protect.
Uh-huh.
The sources say there was just profound silence after that.
How did Greene and the chair react?
The chair seemed hesitant, unsure how to move forward. Greene herself is described as just frozen, almost stunned.
And Crockett added one more line, unscripted.
Apparently so. We were elected to protect them, not persecute them. It just crystallized everything.
And the hearing just ended after that.
A quiet adjournment. Greene lingered in the empty room, the sources say. It really felt like a definitive moment.
What was the fallout from that speech?
Immediate and widespread. It went viral almost instantly, but differently this time. It seemed to resonate emotionally, cutting across partisan lines more than previous clips.
Did it impact Greene politically?
Public opinion polls mentioned in the sources showed a noticeable dip in her favorability ratings after that.
And the sources contrast Greene's situation with Casar and Crockett.
Yes, there are these descriptions. Casar, back in Austin, listening intently to a young Jewish woman worried about anti-Semitism. Crockett in Dallas, connecting with young people, educators.
Real representation.
Exactly. Highlighting that theme of genuine connection and representation while Greene is depicted as more isolated, maybe contemplating things in her office.
There's that final conversation between Crockett and Casar.
Right, reflecting on the unexpected impact they had, how they felt they had become shields for marginalized communities put in the spotlight by the committee.
And Crockett's final thought.
They gave us a microphone to mock us, but we used it to speak truth and the world listened. It perfectly sums up that reversal.
And her assessment of the Doge Committee itself.
When asked by a journalist, her response was really insightful. It revealed everything they didn't want shown. It handed us the very tools they thought would undo us. The committee was a trap, just not for us.
So wrapping this up, what we've really seen in these sources is a story about, well, about how performative power, this kind of aggressive posturing,
Yeah.
can unravel when confronted strategically with facts, with truth, and with authentic representation.
Yeah, the contrast between Greene's tactics and the approach taken by Crockett and Casar is incredibly stark.
It really is. And it maybe underscores a broader point, that real leadership isn't always the loudest voice. Sometimes it's found in that quiet defiance, that steady conviction.
The courage to speak truth, even when it's difficult.
Precisely. Especially when facing that kind of opposition.
It makes you think. And maybe the final thought for you listening, what's one truth you've stayed silent about that maybe the world or just your world needs to hear? Something to mull over.
Definitely food for thought. And it's worth remembering, of course, that this deep dive synthesizes information from various sources into a narrative. It draws on real events and public figures, but the structure is meant to highlight these themes: justice, dignity, resilience.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.